Please welcome from Villanova University, Dr. Mary HIRSCHFELD.
We live in a culture that tends to think of the common good, if we think about it at all, as well. Maybe it's like GDP being high and maybe a certain amount of equity of distribution of goods, but we think about it in individualistic terms. In the Catholic tradition, however, and the Catholic tradition is very strongly behind thinking about the common good, the common good has a much richer conception. And the idea is basically the common good is the social space in which we find our own flourishing as human beings. How do we find our own happiness as human beings? So to really understand the common good, you have to understand how do we find our happiness as human beings. And to understand that, you have to think about what kind of beings are we? What does it mean to be a human person? So my plan is to talk about that. What is human happiness? How is that found in the common good? Then I want to talk about how business is ordered to the common good, and that's where we can talk about how businesses serve the common good. We tend to think about it in the modern world, and especially here in America, as human happiness is getting what you want. You know, you go out and you do whatever it is, and you get what you want, and that's what makes you happy. But the tradition here is to think about human flourishing as progress in being rather than progress in having. That's how John Paul II puts it. And what he has in mind by there is because we're created in the imago Dei, we try to find our happiness by being like God as much as possible. And if you think about who or what God is the perfect actualization of all being, right? He's a complete manifestation of himself. So his creatures who mirror or reflect him find their own happiness by perfecting themselves, by becoming the full capacity of what they have to be. Connections, right? So if we're social, part of our flourishing requires a flourishing together. So we have to care about our common life together. I can't be fully human apart from a fully human community. And that's where the common good comes in, right? So the common good entails our shared language, our shared culture, our shared encouragements for each other. At our table here at breakfast, we were talking about how different places seem to have different values, and some seem to be more shaped towards cultivating relationship, community, and a good life as compared to other places. That's part of the common good. But of course, also part of the common good is the provision of the material goods we need, because we're embodied, animals, so we need food, shelter, and the goods and services that allow us to flourish. Material flourishing, the kind that America tends to think about, economic prosperity, is not at all a bad thing, okay? God created the world to provide us, sustain us in a way that's comfortable and flourishing. The key idea, though, is that the economic flourishing that's certainly part of the common good is good because it supports those higher goods, okay? So it's good to have enough food and shelter and so on so you can have people come over to your house for dinner parties. The good is the community of the dinner party and all the things that serve it. How does the business serve the common good? Now it should be completely obvious, and you guys already know this. Businesses serve the common good by producing goods and services that are of value to other members of the community at a fair value, right? That's obviously supporting the common good. So if my job as an engineer and I figure out my engineering project and I bring it in on time and on budget and it makes them better off and they can pay me and I can support my family and I'm better off, it's a win-win, we're all good. Businesses also have the capacity to serve the common good in their own enterprise. So as very few of us work off by ourselves, right? So in the business firm, you have a community there, a chance to help encourage each other to grow in this excellence or virtue I talked about, right? So you're a community, small community, working together towards a common end of providing air conditioning service or whatever. You have your relationships and a chance to help everybody develop their capacity and their potential. Now, one thing I haven't talked about is where do profits fit in all of this? And in this nice, benign, well-ordered view of human society, profits have a perfectly valuable role to play. Profits are the signal that tell you as a business person whether your product or service is a good value for the community, right? So if I decide to serve the community by making these finely handcrafted togas, My complete lack of profits would be a signal to me that what I'm doing with my time and effort and talents is not actually benefiting the community, and then that would tell me that I should go and do something else. Okay. By the same token, if I'm producing something that is of value and I make extra money by doing that, that's a signal to me that maybe I should try to expand production, or maybe it encourages other people to come in and provide a similar good, and that sort of thing. So the market, through its signals of prices and profits, helps us coordinate all of our activities in a way that's actually helpful to one another. What goes wrong is an inversion. And I would say this inversion is pretty ubiquitous in our culture. So if we were doing this right, the way you would think about it is, I'm going to be a dry cleaner. I clean some clothes. And then I sell that service for money, which I then use to exchange to get the goods and services I need in order to pursue my life. Okay? So that's commodity exchange for money in order to get another commodity, CMC. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. We tend to flip that, and we tend to start thinking about profits as something to pursue as an end in itself, right? And so all of a sudden, instead of thinking about, I'm a neighbor, I've got a bunch of neighbors, I'm going to do this service, I'll exchange it with them, I'll get the services and goods that they provide, right? Instead, I start thinking, how can I get more money? So I start with a certain amount of a business investment, a certain amount of money. I figure out some commodity to produce so I can maximize my profits, and then I get more money, and then I repeat. And now I've gone from thinking about money with some kind of intermediate production of some sort so I can get more money. Do you see my inversion? Money has gone from being a servant of the order to being its master. So if you read, say, Pope Francis, he'll often talk about the idolatry of money. And that's what he's talking about, that inversion, where we go from thinking about exchange as a tool for pursuing a good life to the pursuit of money as an end in itself. Money mimics God in a couple ways. First of all, when we think about our desire, our hunger for God, it's a hunger for the infinite good. That's what you're built to want at the end of the day. You want to be a good, flourishing human person in this life, but you still long for that fuller fulfillment in God, okay? But money seems to promise that, because money seems to say you can get whatever you want. If I have money, I can get the next thing and the next thing, and that seems to be something that moves me towards the infinite, okay? But notice it's an infinite of an accumulation of a succession of finite things that I can have, and that doesn't order me to that all-encompassing good that God is, right? So the secularization in our culture, the fact that it's harder for us to access the infinite goodness that God is, or at least to understand our lives should be oriented to it, I think makes us more vulnerable to being co-opted by money. Money has the quality of being this sort of, this promise. It's like this promise that's just around the corner, so you never can quite get to it. So money tempts us to start looking for our happiness in a fantasy of the thing that's just out of reach, rather than the real good thing that's right before us, right? But God is in the real thing right before us, and learning to find our happiness in what's right here. That's where it's really at. But money tempts us to not see that, and it tends to take us away from what's actually good. And because it can never really satisfy, because it's not God, right, then we just want more of it and more of it. And I think that's part of the culture that goes into this.